Hello Sword Fam, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Brittany. Today I have the pleasure to show you guys the new SIGI Forge Light Federschwert. Not one, but two. So yes, I had to get two of these. This model in particular is marketed as having to work in tandem. You do need a pair to actually spar with one another. But before we get into that, let's take a look at the specs. This sword is advertised as moving at the speed of light, hence its name, the Light Feder. However, it's also physically just very light, coming in at only 1,250 grams or 2 3/4 pounds. This is ultra lightweight. However, that's not to say this is the lightest on the market or the only one in that kind of weight class, but as far as standard feders go, this is actually really light. It also has a flex of 9 to 11 kilograms, which is ultra flexible. The fact that I can just sit here with one hand and give it a big bend is really impressive. A lot of other feders are a little bit more stiff, so the ultra flexibility for this lends it even more of a safety feature and makes it very light. Design-wise, this is a really beautiful sword, and I'm gonna get back to why I think that's really important. But let me first point out that this sword is not peened. Hopefully you can see that there on the end. This is a threaded pommel. The tang is threaded in, and you use an Allen key to turn the nut so that you can take the whole thing apart. Yeah, this has a replaceable blade. I love this. Now, this is not the first sword on the market to have a replaceable blade. There's been plenty. I could name them all, but that's not what this video is about. However, this is the first model that SIGI has introduced with the replaceable blade concept. I think this is actually very special because the idea here is that it's utilitarian, it's highly functional. We want this to be economically more available to more people. But not only that, the design is likely that it may break more frequently if it's put under a huge amount of stress. For that reason, SIGI recommends that you actually buy these in pairs. You want to get two if you want to train with these with somebody else. It's probably not the best idea to have this being put up against some other bigger, heavier swords such as the Ensifer Long. I would maybe not do that. However, if the blade does break, being able to just replace the blade alone and keep all the hardware keeps your costs really low. I'd mentioned the aesthetics being something that I value a lot. Anybody that's been on my YouTube channel for any amount of time will know that I'm a huge sucker for aesthetics. Anything pretty is like perfect in my books. But in this case, what I really appreciate about that is that even though this is supposed to be a highly functional utilitarian blade with economy in mind, it didn't necessarily come across as disposable. When you design something with a replaceable blade, I think the idea is that it's supposed to be disposable. So a lot of the nice features that you're used to, little designs on the crossguard, having a very pretty shield, a nice cord wrap, and even little details here, these kinds of things don't often come across in other replaceable blade models because why spend the extra money? So even though it is supposed to be a workhorse model, this is something that has high utility. It wants to be used a lot, again and again, and the blade breaks and you just keep reusing the hardware. It doesn't aesthetically come across as disposable. It doesn't aesthetically come across as being like the economy, bare bones kind of Federschwert. This is actually visually very pretty, and I really like that. I feel like I don't have to compromise at all to have a functional sword that gets high reps and isn't super expensive, but is also very pretty. So I really appreciate that detail. I will say that with a replaceable blade, however, be prepared that the feeling of the feder hitting another feder is a little bit different than what you might be used to with a permanent peened tang. The vibrations that you feel in the hand are a little bit different, and in other models I've noticed that it feels sort of dead in the hands. However, I didn't think that with this sword. It has a beautiful ring to it still, but it also doesn't feel totally just falling flat in the hands, which is such a nuanced thing and it's such a personal preference that I'm not gonna say that that's going to be important for everybody, but for me, it made a big difference. I was really afraid that with the threaded pommel, it would feel really, really flat, really dead in the hands, and fortunately for me, it did not feel that way. From the perspective of a practitioner, these are the things that I really like about this sword. High reps, low weight. So when I first started doing HEMA, I really didn't have a lot of choices for swords. I basically had something that was really heavy, and it was a workhorse. And it was really hard for me to keep up, so to speak, when, look at me, I'm a noodle, let's be honest. If I had a lighter sword, I could probably do even more reps. This is really important from not only a practitioner's perspective, but from an instructor's perspective. If I can keep my students training longer, keep them on the floor longer, and really maximize their time on the floor by being able to swing a sword for longer, that's a huge win. Leapfrogging a little bit off of that same idea, the wear and tear on your body is going to be lessened. There's going to be fewer fatigue-related injuries, stress injuries, and then of course, because the sword itself is lighter and the flexibility requires less force, the overall potential for injuries just in sparring and training from being hit or struck with the sword is significantly less as well. That, from an instructor's point of view, is also very, very appealing. When this sword model was first announced online, the internet HEMA community got really weird about it. It was extremely controversial, which I think was unfortunate and a little bit unnecessary. There were folks that were very concerned that a model like this would lead to more sportification in our art. Now, while that may be true, I don't think people really need to worry too hard about that, because HEMA has always been very grassroots. It's never been monolithic. So there are folks where this is going to work perfectly well for them, and it may be a little bit more sporty. And then if that's not for you, that's totally okay. But don't throw the sword out with the bathwater. I would really hope that you would consider this not as being sporty, but as a really great training tool. I like to approach my training in a holistic way. If I can have multiple tools in my toolbox that I can utilize to try and get the most out of my training, I'm gonna do that. And I think that this fits very well within my holistic toolbox. I also think that part of the controversy was a concern for safety. People thought that it might have the potential that being put in the wrong hands, because it can move faster, that it's going to mean that people can sort of shrug the responsibility of still being a safe training partner because the tool is gonna basically be safe for them. I really don't think that's the sword's fault. I think this is a club culture issue or a personal issue that maybe should be dealt with on a personal level. I don't think that the sword as a whole is going to be the fault of that issue in and of itself. Rather, I think that if somebody is the kind of person to do that, they're gonna do that no matter what sword you give them. Like, I really don't think that just suddenly because they have a lighter sword, they're gonna be the worst, like, most jerk fencer in the world and suddenly shrug all responsibility. If you've always been a responsible fencer, you're gonna continue to be a responsible fencer. If you're going to be an irresponsible fencer, it doesn't matter what sword you have, you're going to be an irresponsible fencer. So I think that that critique was a little bit unfair to be put on this sword, because really, the physics here means it's just safer overall, and I really do stand by that. So with that said, it's still a sword, right? It can still hurt somebody. So if you're safe, stay safe. If you're not safe, stop fencing. As far as its applications in tournaments, I don't think that it has a place yet. Hear me out. Currently, as it stands, this is not designed to be used with other standard and heavier Feder models on the market. It's just not meant for that at all, hence why SIGI makes it very clear to buy these in pairs to use with each other. So if you do take this against another Feder, you may possibly be voiding the warranty, and you're also mostly just putting your sword at risk unnecessarily, so make sure you're aware of that. However, I think it would be really interesting to see tournaments offer this as another category. Perhaps it's going to be the light longsword event as opposed to just open longsword. I think this would be really cool, because then you can have the swords provided or bring your own blade. And then if the blade breaks, you just replace it right there on the spot. There's no need to find another sword. It's very easy. And then you have identical swords against each other, and you don't have to worry about this being put up against another heavier fetter, for example. I would really like to see not tournaments as a whole move towards that as like the exclusive tournament, the only one that's available. I really like that HEMA is not a monolith. I like that it's very different, that wherever you go region to region, it's unique and it has its own culture. So I don't want to see a regulation of tournaments where this is the only option no matter what. What I would like to see is a couple tournaments offer it as an option, or their tournament in particular is for these swords. I think that would be really, really cool. So enough talking. Let's see it in action.
The first thing I wanted to test was to actually be hit by the SIGI fetter. So I asked my students to spar with me, and I told them if they see blatant openings to not hesitate to take them. So I changed my fencing to start leading with my hands, leaving my head exposed, bringing my hands high in the bind so that they could cut below to my ribs, for example. And really what I wanted to do was see if I could just experience being struck with this fetter in what would be the most like normal circumstances within our school. So just kind of regular sparring without really having to force anything, being like, okay, I'm gonna stand here and just have you hit me. I really wanted to do it in an organic way. I almost regret telling my student this because at first he was a little bit hesitant to really go for stuff. I wish I'd just sort of like was like, oh, just spar with me, and didn't really give him a heads up as to what was going on. But once he kind of got into the groove and realized it's just sparring, then he had a lot more success with it. And of course I had to let Kyle try it out too, so here he is hitting me in the head a couple of times. And of course, I didn't keep all of the fun to myself. I put these on the floor for my students to use in regular classes, through training, through sparring. So here's some exchanges with two of my students. And the nice thing about being able to just put these on the floor to be used regularly means that these swords can get a huge amount of use, like just hours put into them, more so than just a single individual could do. So we got to put these under a lot of duress. And they do take a set, but that was also pretty normal for the other SIGI models as well. So that didn't surprise me, and the set was very easy to bend back into place, and they are still holding up really nicely. Everybody in the club thinks that they're great. They're definitely easier to train with, especially if you want to train thrusts. And overall, I really, really like these. I think I'm gonna have to buy a lot more to just sustain my club overall so everybody can use them.